Welcome back. We just finished the introduction of Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pekuda, prefacing his Gate of Trust, the section of his book Chovos Halvavos, Duties of the Heart, which is called the Gate of Trust. And we're now going to actually begin some very exciting information that he begins with in chapter 1. Before we do, I'd like to share a story with you which actually brings out the very point that he's going to make as we begin chapter 1 and go into chapter 2, both of them very short chapters. There's a well-known story with the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. The Baal Shem Tov, a great mystic, he once, as he would often do, he took a number of his students who themselves were all very deep spiritual people in their own right, and he went on a trip with them, and they traveled to an inn. And in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, it was very common that Jews who are not permitted in Eastern Europe to own land, they would lease properties from big landowners, who in Yiddish we refer to as a paritz, a big landowner, and these landowners also had independent power. That's how Poland, the area of Poland, was split up during that era, where different individuals were given, they owned large areas of land, and they sort of ruled over their own land. So Jews would lease land from them for different things. Most commonly, they would lease an inn. And in the inn, they would rent out rooms to people, as is classically done with an inn. They would also sell whiskey to the locals who lived in the area. So they traveled to an inn which was leased by a Jew from a Polish landowner, and they came to this place. And when they came to the place, they were there in the morning, and as they were sitting there, the Baal Shem Tov with his students, they were getting ready to pray, to daven in the morning, and an officer, like a sheriff, came into the inn with a big stick, and he banged on the table that's in the area, in the dining area. He banged on the table 3 times, and then he left. It was a strange thing, but they looked at the innkeeper, the Jew, and he didn't seem to be perturbed at all by what happened. So they went on with their prayers, and they davened. When they finished davening, when they finished their prayers, suddenly this sheriff comes back in. He takes this big stick again, a big baton, and he bangs 3 times on the table very strongly, and he leaves. The innkeeper again disregards it as if nothing really happened. He was not impressed in any way by this sheriff, and he invites his guests, who he was very honored to have, such an esteemed and great rabbi with his students, to sit down for breakfast. And they sat down, they were eating breakfast. And so the Baal Shem Tov asked the innkeeper, what's going on with the sheriff? Why is he coming in and banging on the table? He said, he comes in and bangs on the table when my rent is due. Or if I haven't paid for a few months and there's a warning, he comes and he bangs on the table. And so they said, well, you're sitting and eating breakfast with us, and you seem to be quite calm. We're assuming everything is fine, and you have the money, so there's nothing to worry about. He said, well, actually, the sheriff actually comes 3 times. By the 3rd time, that's my last warning, and I know I have a few hours that I have to, within a few hours of that last warning, I have to go pay the bill. But to be honest with you, I don't have any of the money. I don't even have a single ruble. He was poverty-stricken. He didn't have any money. So the Baal Shem Tov said, wow, you don't have any of the money, and you're sitting here so calmly. He says, yeah, I have plenty of time still. He still has to come again, and after that I have another 3 hours, so there's plenty of time, and God's going to provide me with the money. Unbelievable. And this is why the Baal Shem Tov wanted his students to experience, a man that has true trust. However, the story's not over. They finish eating, and after they finish eating, the sheriff walks in again, and he bangs 3 times on the table, and the innkeeper says, I have another 3 hours, let me prepare, because it's a long walk to the paritz's home, palace, to pay him the money. So he gets up, he dresses himself appropriately as he was going before the paritz and the landowner, and he goes outside. He starts walking the long trek to get to They asked him, where are you going? You don't have any money. He says, I don't have any money yet, but God's going to provide. But I said, I'll have the money when I need the money. And so the Baal Shem Tov goes onto the porch with his students, and they stand and they watch as the man who was walking, he gets smaller and smaller in the distance, when suddenly they see a wagon driving down the same road in the opposite direction of the innkeeper. The innkeeper is walking this way, and the wagon's coming the other way. And the wagon stops, and there's a little bit of a conversation they can see from the distance between the wagon driver and the innkeeper. And there's a conversation, and then the wagon continues driving towards them, and suddenly stops, turns around, goes back to the innkeeper. Another conversation seems to be going on. A bag of money is handed from the wagon driver to the innkeeper, and then the innkeeper takes it and keeps on walking. When the wagon starts rumbling down the road past where the inn was, the Baal Shem Tov waved down the wagon. And he asked the wagon driver, he said, excuse me, sir, can I ask you a question? I noticed that you stopped and you spoke with a gentleman who was walking. May I ask what the conversation was about? He says, oh yeah, when I passed him, I noticed he was the innkeeper, and I wanted to make a deal with him that all of the whiskey he produces this coming winter, I can buy from him. So we were negotiating a price. He wanted a higher price, I wanted a lower price, and we couldn't settle on the price. And I saw that he was adamant about the amount that he wanted. So, and I couldn't negotiate anymore, so I left. He says, so then what happened? After I started riding, I realized that this man is a very upstanding individual who can be trusted absolutely. And I thought to myself, I'd rather do business with someone who's upstanding and I can rely on, who's totally trustworthy, and I won't have any issues with, and I'll pay him a little more money than go making a deal with other people that I've made deals with who then don't produce the goods and I have issues with. So I turned around and I went back to him and said, I agree, and I gave him the amount of money. So what happened? The innkeeper got the money he needed to pay the landowner. And he got the money because he truly trusted in God. And how do you know he truly trusted in God? We know he truly trusted in God simply by his emotional disposition. He was calm. Calmness, as we will see soon in a few minutes, is one of the indicators that one is truly trusting. When we are not calm, we may tell ourselves we're trusting, but clearly we're not. When we are calm, that is the greatest indicator that we are trusting. So we're going to just preface that there are 7 chapters to the gate of trust. We already went through the introduction. We're going to review what the 7 chapters are about, and then we're going to jump into the first chapter to see how this story is an exact example of what trust is all about. So he explains that having pointed out what occurred to me on the advantages and benefits of trust in God, as we discussed all of the benefits and advantages in the introduction, in religious as well as secular life, in whether it's a Jewish life or just a normal human life, I will now explain the following 7 aspects of this trust. So chapter 1 is simply, what is trust? What does trust look like? What are the essential features of trust? That's going to be chapter 1. Chapter 2 is, what 7 factors are necessary for a trustee to have? Now, actually, what are the 7 factors that one must know about the person they are trusting in order to be able to trust in them? Chapter number 3 is going to discuss the necessary prerequisites to achieve complete trust and to do what God instructs. So we're going to see that there are 2 sides to trusting. When you're in a trusting relationship, that means that A, I trust you, and B, that because I trust you, I play my role in the relationship so that trust can be fulfilled. So that's what he's going to explain in chapter 3. Chapter 4, he's going to discuss the instances in which trust is applicable, where it is praiseworthy and where it is reprehensible. There are certain times that trust is out of place. Why? Because it calls for us to act, not to trust. So he's going to explain when trust is called for and when it's actually, as he says, reprehensible, where it's something which is very negative. Chapter number 5 will discuss the difference between the way one who trusts in God employs the means of obtaining a livelihood. When someone trusts in God, how do they approach earning a living? and the way one who does not trust in God employs them. And how does he look different than someone who does not trust in God in the way that person would go about earning a living, which relates to every single one of us, is a very practical chapter, as all of these chapters are going to be, actually. The 6th chapter is the different ways in which one is obligated to condemn the view of those who advocate protracted gratification of worldly desires, how it is very inappropriate and negative for someone to seek out indulgence in worldly desires with the hope of assuming the service of God once these desires have been fulfilled, saying that I'm first going to take everything I can from the world, and then I will play my role in giving to the world, if you will, or giving to God. God, first pay up the dues so I can know you're reliable, and then I'll rely on you. They are advocates of pledge taking. We call that pledge taking. You take a pledge, you want security before you trust. Now that itself is a sign of a lack of trust. If I need you to convince me that you are trustworthy before I trust you, then once you have convinced me, you don't need me any longer to trust you, as I've explained in the previous classes, right? Because you proved yourself. So that's not really trust. And number 7, chapter 7 is factors that inhibit trust in God. And that's a summation of the topic and a brief survey of its parts. And that's just a concluding chapter that wraps up the subject of trust. So now let's start with chapter number 1. What is trust? What is trust? It is the tranquility of the soul of the one who trusts. That way, how do you know that you're experiencing trust? If you are tranquil. His heart's reliance on the one in whom he trusts. That I can rely on the one upon whom I trust 100%, so I don't have to worry, because they're taking care of it. And we trust that reliance is on the one whom he trusts to do what is good and right for him in the matter of the trust. That in the area that I'm trusting you, I know that you will do good for me, what's good for me and what's right for me, according to his ability and knowledge of what is for his good. According to your knowledge and your ability, you will make sure to do good for me. When I know that, and I can trust that, right? So then I have tranquility, because I know that I trust you, that you will, to the best of your ability and the best of your knowledge, do exactly what is good for me. That is what trust is. And this element of trust includes a number of things. So firstly, when we talk about doing what is good and right, actually, let's continue. So, but what lies at the root of his trust and gives rise to it, without which there can be no trust, is his sure confidence that the one he trusts will keep his word and do what he promised. Now, key to trust is to have full confidence. If you want full trust, right? Full trust means that I have full confidence that the person I'm trusting will keep his word and will do what he promised. If I can't trust that he'll keep his word, obviously I can't trust him. If I can't trust that he'll keep his promise, I can't trust him. And here's the important thing, which he doesn't spell out clearly here, but is going to come out with all of our studies here. That the more we trust, right? Because trusting is, again, a spectrum. It's not as if you wake up one day and you fully trust. It's a spectrum. You can trust more, you can trust less, and we can continue to grow in our trust. The more we trust, the more we receive, the more trustworthy the person we are trusting becomes. Why? Because when I show you that I don't trust you, I'm demonstrating that I lack confidence in you. And what does that do? That demotivates you. That's like an employer and an employee would be a classic example. When an employer doesn't demonstrate trust to an employee, he is actually weakening his employee. When a parent doesn't demonstrate trust in a child, he weakens the ability for the child to cultivate their capabilities. And that's number one. Number two is when we trust someone, we show them by the fact that we're trusting them that we're really relying on them. And they feel, if you will, the burden or the responsibility of the fact that this is up to them now, because we're relying on them. We're truly relying on them, so it's really up to them. And that brings out from within them a greater level of responsibility, and they become more trustworthy. Now, if this is true with a human being, as we say, al achas kama v'kama, all the more so, it is with God. Because God, as we will learn, and even though this requires some education about God, and understanding about how God interacts with the world, but I want you to know that through these classes we're going to be assuming certain things which are facts actually about God, but sometimes we are weakened because we haven't learned a lot about God yet. But that is that as we say, as the prophet Isaiah writes in the verse, Bidchu b'Hashem, we say this in our prayers every morning, Bidchu b'Hashem adeyad, trust in God entirely. Adeyad means entirely. Ki beka Hashem tzur olamim, because through God will be our eternal rock. That means that God is absolutely trustworthy. So what it's telling us is that when we trust God adeyad entirely, the result is tzur olamim. God is an entirely substantive rock for us to stand upon. But again, God says, I exchange with you based on the trust you demonstrate to me. And this is what the Zohar actually explains, that the more energy and devotion that we place in our trust in God, that He is our only hope. We demonstrate to God that God, we know that no one else, people can help through being your agent. But ultimately, Hashem, you are the only one. God, you're the only one who can actually help me. Then the reciprocal response from God is the level of trust that we demonstrate in God. And another point is that the one that we trust, He has in mind to benefit him, even in what he did not commit himself to undertake to do, out of pure grace and kindness. Another important point in which we understand what trust is. Trust is when I am trusting in someone and I know that that person will exercise kindness and graciousness to me, even in areas that I didn't ask them to. If they see that there's something that will benefit me, that they will actually give that to me. Because that demonstrates that they are unconditionally committed to me. If someone only does what I ask them to do, they're very calculated, right? They do what I ask them to do. So that's very nice. But it doesn't show that that I can trust them absolutely, because they're not absolutely committed to me. They're only committed to things I ask them to do. And in some respect, that questions even how committed they are to me, or as opposed to how committed they are to their being a responsible person and doing what they agree to do. But when a person is committed entirely to me as a person, so that even when they say, "Oh, 1 second, he asked me to do this, but if I do this, this will be even more beneficial to him," and they go and do it, that's someone who's truly trustworthy. So this is just a basic understanding, which is not very complex, very, very basic understanding, that a person who trusts is tranquil in the heart. They're not a person who worries. And that comes when we have confidence that the one we trust will keep their word, and even go beyond their word, because if they see that there's something that will benefit me, they will do that for me, which demonstrates absolute trust in me. Now here's a very fascinating point, which I'm saying right in the beginning, because this is an obvious question that probably already came up and is going to come up many other times. And that is, well, what happens if I'm not deserving? How can I trust that God will do everything I need when it could be that I'm not deserving? And if I'm not deserving, then maybe God won't, not because of God's fault, but because of my fault. And here's the important thing to understand, and this really takes trust to its fullest extent, which we need to actually really appreciate. And this is explained by different great commentators of generations of the past, one of which is the Maharal of Prague, who lived about 400 years ago, and he explains that even if one is not deserving, he is still to have trust in God. And if someone truly trusts in God, which is a really hard level to achieve, but if someone truly trusts in God, God will be the person's shelter even if they are not deserving. And this is a very powerful point, because it demonstrates to us that the love and the care God has for us is unconditional. What does unconditional mean? Unconditional means there's no condition. It's not a condition of whether I did what God wanted me to do today. If I'm living up to what God is expecting of me. Even if I'm not, God unconditionally loves me, and therefore God unconditionally will unconditionally give to me and provide for me and save me and protect me. It's just that I need to trust that God in fact loves me and cares for me and will even do the things beyond what I ask him to do. And that's why it's important to understand that we're not saying that we believe that God can do good. We're not saying that we believe that God will do good, or that when I am deserving, God will do good. What we are doing is we are developing a divine service, or a divine or a relationship. It would be a better way of putting it. A relationship which I am developing with God, which is a relationship where I become aware of the fact that God loves me in such an unconditional way, that despite all of my weaknesses and failures, and all of my failings, which every single one of us has, and there's always reason why I may not be deserving, but despite that, when I show God that God, I am deeply connected to you in my relationship, and I know how much you love me unconditionally, that Hashem says, I will be there for you unconditionally, which then takes out of the equation whether I am deserving or I'm not deserving. And so when we live with this knowledge, God will without doubt bestow upon us revealed good. Now someone may ask, and I'm sure we ask, well, what do you mean? I've trusted in God and yet I haven't experienced revealed good. So the response to that is to reanalyze our trust. And it's very unique that someone has such absolutely pure trust in God, which would explain our question. But the more, again, being that it's a spectrum, the more we develop that trust, the more profound our relationship with God is. And the more, as we said, it's reciprocal, the more trust we have, the more trustworthy God becomes in actuality for us as an individual. So now let's go to chapter 2. And in chapter 2, we're going to see if we can conquer part of chapter 2. Where chapter 2, the Rabbeinu Bachya tells us the 7 factors that are necessary for one to be able to put their trust in God. And what he's going to do is going to spell out the 7 factors, and then he's going to review them again and bring verses to show how all of these 7 factors apply to God. So he says there are 7 factors that would make it possible for one to place his trust in another person. If you want to be able to put your absolute trust in someone or something, they must have these 7 attributes. If they don't have these 7 attributes, then they don't have the characteristics that would permit a person to fully trust them. So he says, number 1, compassion, empathy, and love. If you want to put your trust in someone and they don't have compassion, you can't trust them. They're heartless. How can you trust them? Right? So it's obvious. They need to be compassionate, empathetic, and loving. For when a person recognizes that his friend has compassion and empathy for him, he trusts him, and his soul is at ease in regard to any matter with which he troubles his friend. Right? We all know from our friends that we have some friends who are very kind and very loving, and they'll be there for us for things that they're capable of being there for us for, right? But they'll be there for us. We have other friends we know. We turn to them. They're not going to be there for us. That's very clear. One of the fundamental characteristics is: are they a loving person? Are they an empathetic person? Do they feel for things that we need, that we want, where we need support and we need help, or not? Are they compassionate? That's number 1. Number 2 is the knowledge that in addition to loving him, in addition to the love, his friend does not disregard him or neglect his wishes. Rather, he strives and is resolved to fulfill them. For if one cannot be certain of him in this regard, one cannot have full trust in him, since one is aware of the latter's indifference and neglect in attending to his interests. But if the one in whom he trusts combines both these qualities, he feels compassion for him and actively watches over his interests, he will unhesitatingly put his trust in him. So it has to be someone who actually won't abandon us and actually takes interest in our affairs and what's going on with us. They have to be aware of what's going on with us, and they can't be someone who's too lazy to be concerned. So number one, they need to love us. And number two, they need to be a person who's not going to neglect attending, neglect our interests because they're busy with their own. So they have to be attentive to us, you can say. They have to be attentive to us. Number three, in just a moment here. Yeah. Number three, so now this is already challenging the trust we have in other people. Number two, we have a lot of friends who are compassionate, but sometimes we have friends who are compassionate. But if you call them at 11 o'clock at night, they say, "Listen, I'm way too tired. I can't." That's what number two is talking about. They are going to neglect to be there for us. Number three, the one in whom he trusts is strong, not to be overcome in whatever he seeks, or prevented by anything from fulfilling the request of one who trusts in him. If he's weak, however, one cannot have full trust in him, even if it's established that he's compassionate and involved, for he will be prevented most times from carrying out his purpose. When these three qualities are united in him, trust in him is more fitting. So now we need to have someone who is compassionate. We need to have someone who will attend to us. But we also need to have someone who's capable. Right? Now, we have needs in many areas. To find a human being who's capable in every area is simply impossible. And even in the areas that our friends are capable, different friends, different capabilities, but even that is to a limit. If we want to truly trust someone, we have to be trusting someone who is strong and nothing is more powerful than him. If nothing is more powerful than him, then he can control anything and everything, and then we can put our full trust in him. Otherwise, we can only put partial. We can be hopeful, but we can't be fully trusting. So number four, he knows the ways in which the interests of the one who trusts in him can be served. He is never unaware of what is beneficial to him, inwardly or outwardly, and of what can improve his condition. If he does not know all this, the soul of the one who trusts in him cannot be at ease. But if he has all these qualities, knowledge of the ways to his well-being, ability to act on them, governance on them, and empathy, that's the four that we've listed until now, one's trust in him will undoubtedly be strengthened. In other words, sometimes we go to a person, we have a problem, and our friend is very empathetic, and they're very wise, and they're very helpful, and they're not neglectful. They will attend to us. However, and they'll give us all the time, right, and all of the energy. However, they only know us to the extent that the one human being can know another human being. Psychologically, we're very complex people, right? And with everything we share and as honest and as open as we want to be, sometimes the other person can't fully grasp our essence of who we are and what's disturbing us and what the issue is, etc. If you have a being that understands us outwardly and inwardly in every aspect of us thoroughly, that's a person you can put your trust in. Obviously, the only one who has that capability is God. Number five, the one who trusts is under the exclusive care of the one in whom he trusts. From the beginning of his existence in infancy, childhood, youth, manhood, and old age, to the end of his days. That our entire existence is under the trust of this being or this person. When one who trusts becomes fully aware of this exclusive relationship, it follows that his soul will find tranquility in his protector, and he will rely on him on account of his abounding former favors and continuous support. This will lead to the strengthening of his trust in him. In order for us to fully trust someone else, we have to become aware of the fact that my entire being is entrusted in the hands of this person that I'm trusting, or this being that I'm trusting. As long as I only feel that a part of my existence is entrusted to that person, I can't fully trust them, obviously. When a person becomes aware of the fact and imbues within ourselves the true awareness and feeling that my entire being from the moment I was born until today, I'm sustained and I'm carried and I'm cared for by God, so then a person realizes my entire being is entrusted in the hands of God, and therefore I trust God entirely. Number six, the affairs of the one who trusts are entirely in the hands of the one in whom he trusts. No one else can harm him or help him. do him good or shield him from injury, as in the case of a slave confined to a prison under the control of his master. When the one who trusts is in the power of the one in whom he trusts in this way, trust in him is more finite. And the sixth factor in order to be able to trust someone is not only to trust that I and my entire existence is in the hands of God, but that no outside force has control over me. There isn't a single outside force. This is a very powerful idea, which is hinged upon the concept of divine providence. And I would just say that it would be very valuable if you are, and I hope you are, taking this subject very seriously, because it will. This is a singular subject that will transform your life. To study the second section of Tanya, of the book of Tanya, called Shar HaYichud Ve'Emunah, the gate of unity and faith, where the Alter Rebbe explains, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi explains the nature of God and God's interaction with the world. And then we understand, and there's also a later section in Tanya, in Igeres HaKodesh, it's the Alter Rebbe's letters. I think it's the letter 25, where the Alter Rebbe explains this more explicitly, that nothing can happen to me or to you or to anyone without God wanting it to happen. That means that if you want to hurt me, you can't. I only can be hurt if it was divinely ordained that I need to experience that in my life. And if it's not divinely ordained that I should experience that, then you, even though you may attempt to, you won't be able to. It's a fascinating subject in and of its own, which can transform as well the way we experience many things, because then no longer do we get angry at people and at circumstances, thinking that we are in the control of external things, but we always, everything that happens in my life is part of my relationship with God. And the seventh is the one in whom he trusts is absolutely generous and kind. The one who we're trusting has to be absolutely, not usually, absolutely generous and kind. To the deserving as well as to the undeserving. The point we mentioned earlier, that even if someone's undeserving, this entity that we are trusting in is kind and generous. His generosity is perpetual. His kindness continuous, unfailing and uninterrupted. Whoever possesses all these qualities, together with all those previously mentioned, meets all the conditions of being worthy of one's trust. One who recognizes this is obligated to put his trust in him, to be tranquil because of him outwardly and inwardly, in his heart and with his limbs, to submit to him and to accept his decrees and to judge him favorably in all his laws and actions. Now he's going to continue, which we'll do in our next class, how these seven qualities are all found in God, obviously. Now, one may ask an obvious question. Well, I know a lot of people who are very religious people, and they are, we would call them people of God, and yet we find that they do get upset at circumstances, and they do worry, and they are in fear. And that's a great question. And so we have to realize something. This is a very deep characteristic for one to develop in their life. And therefore, it's a very challenging area in everyone's life. And even though someone may live a religious life, it's still a challenge to become strong in this area. Yet that doesn't excuse us, and we need to, through this study and supplementary studies, as I've mentioned earlier, like the Tanya, we can achieve unbelievable level of trust in God, which brings tremendous tranquility to our life and actually helps us focus on what God put us here for, as opposed to being distracted by all of the negative energy that we get caught up in because of a lack of trust in God. I look forward to seeing you at our next class.